All right. So we're in our own group now, and uh, so the topic today is how do you feel about the U.S. government shutdown? But we can also, people are free to talk about whatever topic they want if they don't want to talk about that. And I will be the first reflector. This is kind of a practice we just generally do to model reflection. And not that that's really needed in this circle, but that's typically how we do it. So is there someone that would like to start? Okay, Art.
Sure, I'll start.
So we're going to do 5 minutes.
Okay, great.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm going to start out on topic and talk about the shutdown. My feeling is that it is it's grievously petulant, in my opinion, and it's something that's absolutely not necessary, and it's alarming to see this kind of behavior in our political leadership.
So what I'm hearing is you feel it's petulant, and boy, the other words just went right out of my mind. I want to say like not responsible and like not a way you run a government. But I apologize for what were the other two words, because they were quite good.
Grievously irresponsible, I think it was.
Grievously irresponsible. Okay, yeah. No, I definitely hear that you feel it doesn't make sense and it's not good for the country and it shouldn't be happening, and you really think it's irresponsible.
Yeah, and I feel like there's just so many people being hurt by this process. People who depend on paychecks. In this country, I believe that it's an exception to the rule for somebody to not be living paycheck to paycheck, and to put these federal employees out of their paychecks for now, almost 4 weeks. It's really alarming to me, or it's actually 3 weeks. And it just seems that it's very selfish, and it's very very damaging, and it's hard to watch.
Yeah, so you're feeling really unhappy or maybe even upset because you really think this is hurting a lot of people. There are government workers who are going without paychecks, and you're pretty confident they're suffering, and you think it's really selfish of the president to be doing that.
Yes, exactly. And I think the leadership really should be coming together and figuring out a way to get this government back open while negotiations go on. And I don't see why that's not something that's acceptable. And that's, I guess, where the petulant part comes in.
Yeah, so you really think that it's leadership's job, that what a leader does in this kind of situation is figure out how to get together with other leaders and find a solution to it. And the fact that that's not happening, that's what you think is really selfish.
Yeah. And, this lately they've been throwing around the word emergency regarding this wall on the southern border. And, very few people are acknowledging. I read one article in this whole time that acknowledges the fact that if there's an emergency, then probably a 15-year construction project is not the most urgent way to go about, addressing such an emergency, and and in fact, the money that they're talking about, if it were put into adjudicators and people who could actually process asylum seekers' applications, that would address this so-called emergency a lot more efficiently. And I'm not sure why more people don't see that.
Yeah, so the whole idea that's being presented that this is an emergency, and how to address that emergency by allocating money to build a wall, which would take a very long time. How does that really fit with the idea that it's an emergency? And aren't there better things that could be done to address the emergency, like putting funds towards processing asylum applications or helping humanitarian problems at the border? That would make a lot more sense to you. And so it just seems like it's ridiculous.
Yeah. Thank you. Do I have more time, or?
You do, but you don't have to take it if you feel, like you're finished. But yes, you have more time.
I think I'm good, and I feel heard. Thank you.
Okay. All right, great. Okay, so I'll speak to Tyler.
I'm listening.
Thank you. um, so I feel a lot the way Art does. I think probably he expressed probably most of my honest feelings about this, which is that um, it just seems like a nakedly political power play. Uh, um, and while it's not surprising to me for that to be happening with this president, based on the things that he's done in the past. What really has shocked me is how much the congressional leadership has been unwilling to act against things that that this president has done. So the Republican leadership who say who in the past have said things like they care more about country first, and character matters, and honesty matters. All the things that many of the things that I've heard Republicans say that they care about in the past just don't seem to matter.
So I hear you saying that you're reflecting a lot of what Art was saying, and you're a lot of agreement that he articulated a lot of your feelings really well, and that in particular, the lack of leadership, and that you're not surprised that the president would do this, but you're surprised that Congress people who speak so highly about character and such would roll over so easily.
Yeah. It's as a person who believes in people, like, actually has a lot of faith in the goodness of people and the desire to do right and the desire to do to make the world a better place. It's so disappointed me that what's happening just looks so nakedly political. So people and groups who say that they care about the things that I was just talking about, like honesty and integrity and country, country before party, it just doesn't seem to matter. It's like, well, we can get what we want now, so we're just going to do whatever.
So I hear you saying that you really do believe in people, and the fact that the power moves that are being made are so nakedly political, and it is such a blatant power struggle, is sort of upsetting to see your values be so disregarded, and people who you thought shared your values completely disregard them.
Yeah, and really it's more like people who said that those were their values, not seeming to act on them, And I know why. Like, so the what seems true to me is, well, Trump's poll numbers are too high. If they were lower, they would have gone against him a long time ago, and they would have thrown him out, or they would have opposed him. But his poll numbers are too high, so they can't act against him because it would mean political suicide for them. And I understand that, but it's so nakedly partisan. It's just very disappointing to me.
I hear you saying that, because Trump's numbers are so high, the Congress people are making those decisions based on the numbers and their political career, and the transparency of it is upsetting. That it's obviously a power move and a power play, and the frustration in not being able to do anything about it, and I guess frustration is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, thank you. It's frustration and disappointment.
Okay.
Yeah. And then and the other thing I just want to say, because I've been speaking, pretty strongly, and I have a strong thing about being very careful to judge the intentions of other people. So I have been saying stuff about like what I think is in their mind and why they're acting the way they do. And I am open to the idea that that's actually not the case. And I'm usually the one in the room arguing, like with liberal friends, when they're talking about how awful things, and I'm usually the one saying, well, you don't know that for sure what's in their mind, or you're judging their intention. But I don't. It's really hard for me to find any other explanation. Yeah. So
yeah, I hear you saying that you're usually the one giving people a chance and giving people the benefit of the doubt, and that you're having difficulty doing that right now.
yeah. Thank you. I feel heard.
Oh, cool. So it's my turn now, right?
Yeah.
I guess William's going to be my listener.
Sure.
I am just in the past week, I've realized how close I am to this free speech issue. I have a very, very close friend who is working on fighting Facebook and Google and censorship. And he's very close to some very top people. And I think you guys all have bad information. I think you guys are listening to the news and it's garbage. I think you are being lied to, and I think your emotions are being manipulated in order to use your best sensibilities against you, to use that nice, sweet, empathic side and to weaponize it for somebody else's gain. I think that's what's happening.
Okay. So you have a very close friend who's been fighting censorship on Google and Facebook over there, and he is close to some top people. And so therefore, based upon that information that you feel that we're not getting the proper information, and that people on the left are, and then being manipulated towards some political end that's not necessarily in harmony with what we state, which is basically trying to be more humanistic.
I think that instinct is being taken and manipulated, and you're being fed a narrative that is not true. It is a well-pruned and well-trimmed narrative that cuts out a lot of information and ignores a lot of things, and feeds you exactly the story that you need to play the part that they want you to play. And I see people playing into it left and right, and it's very difficult to push in the other direction, because when people have their narratives questioned, they usually double down on the narrative that they already have. And I don't know how to fight that fight, but it's a very scary position for me to be in. I'm terrified.
Okay.
I'm fucking terrified.
Okay. So
I have to communicate with these guys through encrypted channels and shit. I'm fucking terrified.
Okay. So first I want to capture, your real sense of fear and jeopardy in this, because I think that really came across, even though it was last. I want to acknowledge your concern. And again, what you're seeing is that you feel that people, ordinary people, are being manipulated, and they're being done so in a way that threatens you and some of your close friends. And you're communicating on encrypted channels and things.
Well, yeah, and all the normal communication that everybody's getting over Facebook and CNN and all that stuff is like one channel, and I exist in this whole other world, and I see everything very different.
Okay, so you're saying is that as when you exist in a different world from the mainstream media world, or CNN and Facebook you specifically mentioned, and you're feeling that the world that they portray is very different from the world that you live in and that you're seeing.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. Do I still have time?
Yeah.
I think you do, yeah.
How much time?
A minute and a half.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Other than that, the government shutdown, I think, is just normal political jockeying. And I think Trump is a figurehead. And I think the whole thing is theater. And it's not really the important thing that we should be paying attention to as a population. And I think that what we're doing here with these empathy circles is an excellent, truly human step that we can actually take that isn't just screaming at the stage.
Okay. So you think that Trump is a figurehead, and there's a lot of political theater, but you're feeling that what we're doing here with the empathy circles and listening to each other as more individuals rather than political labels is an excellent first step towards creating a better understanding.
Yeah, it makes me feel safer. I like these. This makes me feel more human, and that I don't know, being in the public and saying some of this stuff makes me feel a little safer.
Yeah.
It's the fact that this is on the internet.
Yeah. So just meeting, just you people who share an interest in dialogue makes you feel a lot safer. And the environment here makes you feel a lot safer from other environments on the internet.
Yeah. Thank you. I feel fully heard.
Okay, sure. Thanks. Okay. I'll go back to Art. Okay. How you doing, Art?
Hi.
So this is fascinating to me. So first of all, I have to comment how cool Tyler's microphone is. I just love it. I really, it makes me feel much more important than I have any right. Anyway, but what I would like to talk about is interesting because I could not disagree with a lot of what Tyler is saying as far as manipulation and what I'm getting. On the other hand, I totally, wholeheartedly, not only with my mind, but my heart, agree with his conclusions. And I think that this is the labyrinth of misinformation that we all have to kind of deal with. I'm, as Lou's had other encounters, I'm not easily swayed. I'm a pretty strong-headed person. I'm sorry. Oh, sure. Thanks.
Let me just repeat that. Fully hear you on the microphone. That's it's sexy AF. But yes, I hear you saying that you don't necessarily agree with every single point that he's making, but yet you do agree with the conclusions that he's coming to. Is that right? Did I get that right?
That's basically it. Yeah.
Okay.
As what I feel about the shutdown, or all of this, it is political theater, and I just look at it in a much larger context. And that certainly there's the report that Trump was cooperating with the Russians, which figurehead, sure, yeah, that's what I'm seeing. But that this is a struggle for who we are, and this shutdown is just one of the sideshows. And I'll stop there. Sure.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm hearing you talk about with regards to the shutdown. You feel like it's a sideshow and perhaps a distraction away from, which is something else that was referenced earlier, away from things that are truly important, like this issue of collusion with Russia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm sure we'll have many more interesting discussions. Generally, I mean, so we have a situation where if Tyler and I met on the street and stuff like that, and we had lunch, we would agree. I wouldn't throw my food, and and I don't think Tyler would either. So we have an ability, and we both I feel as threatened as Tyler does, but for different reasons. But I also agree that, it's about time after, 250,000 years of evolution that we stopped hitting each other on the heads with sticks.
Okay. So I hear you saying that if you were to meet up with Tyler, just on face value, that both of you would probably agree with more than you disagree, and you wouldn't throw food at each other. And that shoot, I just had a space out.
Sure, take your time.
And that I know that you said that you feel that you are afraid as Tyler is, but for different reasons. Was there something that I missed there? I feel like I missed something. I'm sorry.
It's all right. I do. For different reasons, and also kind of paradoxically for the same reasons, because I think that we're both afraid of people who are extreme and then seek violence as a way to somehow solve the problem. It's like, and we've come to a point where I think the argument that if you kill enough people, we'll all be peaceful and happy has been disproven umpteen times. So we got to get along.
Right. It was the 250,000 years of evolution that I missed.
Right.
And so taking that a step further.
That's a big gap there.
It's a huge piece of time. And taking that a step further, as you did, that it seems that it's been proven many times over that violence is not the answer. That it's not the answer is not to kill more people, and that's been proven over and over.
Yeah. And just to say again, I'm a retired special education teacher, and I dealt with people all over the political map and who agreed or disagreed or anything like that. And if you offered, honesty, safety, basic human needs, I didn't have problems with Republicans or people on the opposite side. They understood.
Did you hear the timer go off?
No, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the timer went off. So go ahead and finish your thought. I just wanted to let you know.
Absolutely. So I'm just saying is that it can work. That's all.
Right. Okay. So that last bit I heard that that as a retired special education teacher that you had dealings with people from all over the spectrum, and that you feel that people on the right, as long as there's basic human needs are being cared for, that you don't have problems with their ideology.
Yes, thank you. I feel fully. Thanks, Art. That wasn't easy.
Thank you. No, it's cool. Thank you. Okay. Tyler, I'd like you to reflect. Good.
Sorry, I'm being distracted. One of my friends is coming to pick up this boom box that's sitting right here. Sorry, I was just momentarily distracted.
All good. Are you ready to go?
Are you being a listener?
Yes, I am. He'll be here and at 10:50, so I should be good.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for listening. So this notion of fear is coming up over and over and over, and I think that's something I would like to explore. Personally, I don't necessarily feel a fear for myself. I am more in touch with the emotions of frustration than fear. And I do believe that as others have mentioned here, that this is all a sideshow, and that it is all this smoke screen to really distract us from the true problems that we have in this world and in this country. And I really, really resonate with that. And I guess that's my original point is that as in the process of this distraction, we're hurting real people and in very real ways, and not just the fear that all of us are sharing, but also the fear of feeding families and paying rent and things like that. And that's the thing that's mostly alive for me.
Okay, so I hear you saying that for you you're not so much resonating with the personal, like fear for your personal safety, but you're resonating with the frustration at the damage being done. And that for you, the fear isn't as alive as the frustration over watching something is wrong happen and not being able to do anything. I get that?
Yeah, pretty much. The only thing that I would clarify is that the thing that's really affecting me the most is that it's it's another political shell game, which happens all the time. But in this iteration, people are being hurt, and to me that's wrong, and I just have a real problem with that.
Okay, and we're talking about the shutdown, right?
Right.
Specifically with the shutdown, that it's yet another political shell game, but that in this shell game, people are being hurt. Right. People's lives are being very seriously affected.
Right.
And it isn't just show. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess that's, again, to echo what I'm hearing from others here, that the, I guess the obvious thing for me is that, until a few months ago, the Republican Party had complete power in government and could have passed whatever they wanted to pass, and they didn't. And so for some reason now it's got to affect 800,000 federal employees, to get this sort of thing going, which again proves to me that it is just some sort of smoke screen, shell game, whatever you want to talk about it. But it's like it's the fact that somehow they think it's not obvious is like really troubling to me.
So yeah, I hear you saying that it is definitely a political shell game, but the fact that the Republicans had all the power and had an opportunity to do a whole bunch of stuff, and they didn't. And now we're sitting at a point where 800,000 federal employees are being affected, and that's the level that they're taking the game to, I guess. And that, I don't know, I guess that, that's frustrating. I hear you, expressing frustration with that.
Yeah, and
I don't know what I missed. I feel like I missed something.
Just the very, very last thought, and I'm just going to clarify that now, is that the it just seems like so obvious, and it seems like how can they, how can the powers that be think that we don't see through this, and that we can't evidently see that it is this political smokescreen or whatever you want to call it, but that is really affecting people on a very, very real level.
Yeah, you're saying that that the theater is obvious, that you can see through it, that it's transparent, that they're playing this political shell game, power maneuvering, jockeying game, and you're almost in disbelief that they think they can get that over on us. That like everybody gets it, we can see it, and like you're kind of flabbergasted in how that's still taking place and hurting people. And
exactly.
That mechanism is still in place and still totally works, even when people are hurt.
Yeah, thank you. And this brings to mind something that you said, is the idea of screaming at the stage, like, and I guess I would echo your thoughts from earlier that this empathy circle and this process that we're going through is that much more important in light of this, because we could all sit here and bang our hands against the big door to the fortress and scream at the stage, as you put it, but this is more of a human level in which we might be able to organize and actually affect some kind of real change.
So here you're saying that, you're echoing what I was saying earlier about the futility of screaming at the stage and, banging on the door and such, and the notion that what we're doing here with empathy circles and bridging these political divides gives us the chance to actually organize in an effective way. And that's more powerful than screaming at the stage.
Exactly. I feel very hurt. Thank you, Tyler.
Thanks, Art. I do film and video work professionally. That's why I have this microphone. It's my podcasting mic. So, I guess we'll go with Lou.
Okay.
I don't know. The fear is that I get it, the frustration, and that this does feel like it gives us a chance that it feels like I'm able to move. Oh, that's the guy getting the boombox.
Okay. I'll pause your time. I'm going to pause the recording too.
Yeah, maybe we should let somebody else go. It'll just take me 5 minutes. He's just going to say hi to him and hand him his thing, and then.
Okay. Well.
Okay. Okay, Lou.
Yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit more about my fear and what's going on with me.
Okay.
So with the censorship stuff, what's happened recently is that Sargon of Akkad, who is a speaker, he's a video maker, YouTuber, said the N-word on somebody else's podcast, and then Patreon decided that that was a violation of their terms of service, and they kicked him off of Patreon to cut off his funding because racist, Nazi, blah, 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 blah. So a bunch of the other sort of right-leaning speakers and, the Sam Harris's and Jordan Peterson, that whole crew of people, all have left Patreon and are looking for a new home and are looking for blockchain and Bitcoin solutions that go around these tech powers that be, decentralized solutions that have no single point of failure. So you can't have a Google. It can tell you what you can and can't say. So we're literally at the front lines of free speech online. And
so let me reflect back what I think I'm hearing. So what I'm understanding you're saying is that something that's happened recently is that a conservative or a right-wing speaker, someone not spokesperson, someone who's on the right,
someone who's making videos
was online,
has a point of view
expressing themselves, and they said something. They used the N-word, but they said something that Patreon didn't like and said, this is not consistent with our values, so we are not allowing you to use our service anymore. And I guess, is Patreon a money service? Is that what it is?
Patreon is a subscription service for creators. So you would, it's like PBS. It's like turning your own individual creativity into your own private PBS.
Okay. So what I'm getting is that you're really concerned about any kind of online service or business or company deciding that they're not going to provide services to people who express ideas that they don't agree with. And that is a kind of censorship.
And it's happened a bunch. It's happened to me. It's happened to a bunch of the people that I know that, when you're expressing yourself and you're expressing these views online, and then people misunderstand you, misinterpret you because they have this progressive agenda. So they fit what you're saying into their narrative, and then they get mad about that instead of really listening to what you're saying. Give you an example. I do comedy.
Let me just,
sorry, go ahead.
Let me just reflect that part back. So you're saying that, what you see is happening is someone who, let's say, is conservative, expresses themselves, and what they are saying is misunderstood or misinterpreted or fit into a narrative by people on the left, that they have a certain way that they look at the world. So they interpret what the person says through that lens, and they're misunderstanding the person, and because of that, they just decide, we're going to cut you out. And that's very frightening.
So, I'm really involved in comedy. I find that that's a good way for me to communicate myself sometimes, and I get a lot of joy out of it. And I wrote these jokes about arguing for the existence of a matriarchy, of America being a matriarchy, which I think is very funny. And this other comic took my Facebook post and reposted it on his wall and was basically screaming, like, why don't you start hitting women in the streets? Like, his interpretation of my argument for matriarchy was that I must then think it's a tyrannical matriarchy that we must rebel against using violence, so I must want to hit women. I'm like, oh, that's what's in your head.
Right. Okay, so what I'm hearing is this is an example that actually happened to you, where you took some of your comedy about the possible downsides or extremes of a matriarchal society, and it was meant comedic as a way to kind of show something, and it was misinterpreted, and people.
And that was labeled as misogynistic,
and the person
violence towards women, like everything terrible that I totally didn't intend.
Right, and so you were misinterpreted in this way, and part of the process that you think actually happens there is people are projecting their own thinking and their own biases when they project stuff on people from the right.
Yeah, that was one of the most interesting takeaways that I had from that whole experience. The whole exchange was realizing that his mentality was that he was weaponizing his ideology to attack this greater thing. And so because I had set up that same sort of ideological argument, I must also conclude attack and violence. And so I'm echoing your sentiment of that's not an option. Like William was saying, 250,000 years of this shit. Like we know the game by now. We know that's not an option. We shouldn't be doing that. We know better. And it's frustrating to not be able to communicate that to some of these people.
Yeah, so you're really just saying, again, I think that, or re-emphasizing the point that people that come from a particular ideology, so people, let's say on the far left, who are looking so strongly through this lens that they've constructed, and they interpret everything through that lens. And so people on the right are demonized and automatically assigned the most negative intention, and because of that, and that and that you really think it's unfair and it's frightening and it's, not right.
Yeah. Thank you. I feel fully heard.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, I will. So Art, will you listen to me?
Happy to.
Boy, the rich conversation. This is so. I'm feeling a lot of gratitude towards Tyler for the things that you're expressing and bringing topics that have a lot of meaning to me and that I think are important that also need to be addressed and talked about. So I'm grateful that you helped us enter that space. We'll stop there.
Yeah, I hear you expressing gratitude to Tyler for raising these issues that are resonating with you, and that you're appreciative that this is now in front of us and we're talking about it.
And I totally agree that I have seen too people on the left who have such a strong ideological lens that they're looking through that they take the most negative interpretation of anything that's been said, and they assign that to people. And I think that that's very damaging and hurtful. And I think, I recognize it comes out of their own pain of being so afraid and so worried about the consequences of people promoting ideas that they think are harmful, and they want to find a way to stop it. But it's a kind of violence. It's not physical violence, but it's a kind of violence that is damaging, and it does not help solve problems.
Okay, I'm hearing you say that you agree with Tyler in the sense that that there are people who are sort of projecting their own views on what people are saying, and even though it's coming from a point of pain and concern, the instinct that you're seeing is that people are trying to stop that speech, which is not the answer.
Yes, and my observation is that happens both on the left and the right, and it's an attribute of people on the extremes. It's an attribute of people that think in extreme ways. Like there's only one way to look at this. I definitely know I'm right, and I know what the truth is here, and because I know I'm right and I know the other person is wrong, I can use any means necessary kind of to make sure that they are shut down or that they're stopped.
Right.
And I don't know. Obviously, I don't agree with that.
Right. I apologize, but in the last segment, I failed to mention that you see this as a form of violence, and I think that's what you're expressing again here, is that you see it on both the left and the right, and you see that people are feeling that they are so sure of their own rightness that gives them the right to or they feel that gives them the right to shut down the other, because they feel that there's no way that they could be wrong, and therefore they have the right to shut it down. But again, that goes to the idea of violence and force, which you obviously don't agree with.
Yeah, and I also, in a way of bringing compassion to the world, I don't want to demonize them either. So these people that are in the extremes, and they're doing what they think is right. They are trying to save the world. So I don't want to demonize them for demonizing others. I want to have compassion for them, because I do think, they're frightened and angry and hurt, and they're trying to stop harm. But it's often the case that people who are coming out of pain and trying very hard to stop harm, they often create harm in the way that they do it. And that's also, to me, what's hopeful about what we're doing here, which is really trying to listen to each other. And we are in dialogue to understand each other, not to convince each other, demonize each other, shut each other up, yeah. So.
Great. So I'm hearing that you're trying to see it from or are seeing it from a point of compassion, and therefore understanding that these people are coming from a place of pain, and they're trying to do something that is going to alleviate their own pain and suffering, and therefore you don't want to demonize them for that. And furthermore, that this is the exact point of what we're doing here, is that we're not we're not listening to each other to try to convince each other of our own views. We're really listening to understand the other person's views.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you. I feel very heard.
Yeah, that was a long one.
Yes. And my time's up. So I just want to say too that I think the question about information flows and what we understand about the world and what's happening is a result of the information flows that we have. And how do we know if we are listening to a reliable information flow? I think that's a really important topic, and it's something I want to talk more about, but I'll stop.
Yeah. I'm hearing you say that the idea of information flow and the filters that all this information comes through, it makes it very, very hard for us to know one way or the other what is accurate. And that's something that's alive for you, and you want to discuss it further.
Yes. Thank you for hearing me so well.
You're welcome.
I feel
Thank
so
you.
heard. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, man. William, you ready?
Yep.
All right, cool. So I wanted to start off by this idea of projecting the views that one has on the information that one's receiving. And I think that's a really, really heavy point. I think it's a brilliant point that's been brought up. And it actually reminds me, I think last week was an anniversary of Dee Snider appearing before Congress. And he was, about music censorship and everything. And he famously said that, I guess, Tipper Gore was the person, heading this censorship panel in Congress. And he said, well, Tipper Gore was looking for S&M and sex, and that's what she found in the lyrics, but that's not what the lyrics are about.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you found that you thought that the idea of talking about how we have a preconceived filter in which we project upon the information that we get is a brilliant topic for conversation. And the example that you brought up is Dee, I forgot someone who I don't know. That's how old I am. And was up before the Congress, Tipper Gore, and was talking about, her perception. And he basically said that she found S&M in the lyrics because that's what she was looking for through her preconceived notions, but that wasn't the intent of the lyrics.
Right. The subject in question, the song that they were talking about was really about one of his bandmates having to go through some surgery. I think it was a heart surgery or something like that. And the lyrics were about that. But Tipper Gore translated it into a very a supercharged sexual message, which she wanted to try to censor. And I think that's a really illustrative of what we're talking about here.
Okay. So essentially, the mistake that Tipper Gore made was that where she found S&M, he was talking about a bandmate who was going through surgery, some difficult surgery, and indeed it was physical, but not sexually physical. And so she totally distorted the meaning of the song.
Right. And I think that's illustrative of what Tyler was talking about before, is that, or has been talking about the whole time, that we tend to take information and we put it into that box that we have of our own ideals and our ideology. And in doing that, the message gets morphed or edited or somehow changed to fit that ideology within our own minds. But that's very rarely the accurate, translation. And I do believe that that's a very, very dangerous thing.
So you're talking about that it's a very common thing, irrespective of political leanings, that we tend to basically take the information and fit it into our preconceived notions. And this is the thing that you find is a real danger, is we can't avoid it, but not examining.
Yeah. And something that's also alive for me that I think comes into this is that the notion of feminism. And I think that in I think that this process happens a lot with feminism. I think people who are predisposed to believe that there is a certain issue tend to exacerbate the reality of the issue. And I think that's something that I see happening all the time in my personal sphere of information. And I do believe that that's something that's worth, as you said, examining with a clear view, to really see what the issues really are, because often the issues are bad enough on their own that we don't need to sort of, aggrandize them to make them, worse.
Okay. So specifically when you're talking about feminism, there are very strong preconceived notions. And it's not that you're against feminism or anything like that, but that the problems are real and serious enough on their own without any embellishment. And when we try to embellish or distort or try to fit them into our preconceived notions, we do disservice to the actual seriousness of the problem, and we actually probably cause more harm.
Yeah. Thank you. For me, I mean, I think the biggest issue of sex equality, comes down to the ability for women to make the same kind of living as men, for instance. And I think like that is such an important point that sometimes gets lost in the overall conversation, because there's so many other things that sort of get dissected and added into the mix that take away from the core problem.
Okay. So as you're using an example of, and I assume you said, but equal pay for equal work,
Mm-hmm.
As far as women have an equal chance to provide for them and their families. And that in itself, if we could address and then solve that, that would be a tremendous benefit to all sorts of people, both men and women, I assume, because women have men babies, I've heard. And that when we, and then when we try to overly label and things like that, then the actual solutions get lost in blaming and anger.
Right. I recently saw an interview with Jordan Peterson, who was mentioned a few minutes ago. Oh, is my time up?
Did you hear the timer? Yeah.
No, I didn't hear it. Okay. Thank you. I feel heard, William. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Sure. My pleasure. Okay. So where are we? I talked to Tyler. I guess Lou. I guess Lou's up.
Okay. You can do either.
Right. Okay. All right. I'll just go with Lou for right now.
All right.
So. Has not on my mind.
Yeah.
And especially my father passed. Sorry?
You froze up a bit, so I haven't heard what you said so far.
Okay. I said struggle has been on my mind a lot. Specifically, my father passed, but in reflecting on and the struggles that she had. Mother.
So, Bill, you're breaking up still.
Oh, sorry.
Do you want to turn your video off for a moment?
Yeah,
sure,
I'll do that.
Okay.
Okay, is that better?
So I'm hearing you fine now.
Okay, great. All right. So I was basically talking about women's struggles and an example of my grandmother and my mother.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandmother was a published writer and journalist, and she had totally went into my grandfather's practice and stayed there for my father, and kind of subordinized her goals for her quote unquote role. And I just saw how much damage that made.
Mm.
And then when my parents got divorced.
So let me just reflect that back. So the talk about feminism really has brought up for you a focus or some feelings about women's struggle, what you've experienced or seen in women's struggle. And the example you gave was your grandmother, who was a writer and a creative person, and she wound up supporting your grandfather in his practice. and that you saw that really had a big impact on her. Is that right?
Yes, it did. And
Okay.
she, subordinated her career goals for that.
Right.
And that made me very sad.
Hmm.
And then I saw my mother, when she was divorced, at loose ends, and then picking herself up and starting her own business and becoming a very successful businesswoman because of the evolving role of women. I can stop there.
So your grandmother's subordinating her life's journey or what she really wanted to do for herself for your grandfather, you saw how much that harmed her and that made you sad. And then you saw an example of your mother who, after she divorced from your father, made a career for herself and was successful, and you were happy to see that happen because of the changes that had happened that made that possible. Is that right?
Right. Yes. And so I've seen these struggles that women have had, and it has a profound effect on my thinking. And that's what I think about feminism. I certainly will go. I hear Tyler. There seems to be on both of the left and the right, like the professionally aggrieved, and people who just seem to be outraged by one thing or another. In the Me Too movement, I think there's some very necessary corrections, but to be made. But Harv Bronstein, and oh my God, I'm blanking on his name. The comedian who was a senator who had to resign. Al Franken, yeah. I find those totally different situations, and I would certainly like that to be acknowledged.
So let me reflect this back. So I think what I'm hearing you say is that because of the personal things that you've witnessed in your own life with your mother and your grandmother, you're very much sympathetic to feminism and very much support feminism and the idea that, there should be more equality and justice for women, and that you support feminism and the idea that we need to keep working, that there's more to do, and that you think that the Me Too movement also has been important. The sexual harassment and sexual assault, those are all really important, and parts of it has gone too far, like Al Franken, and parts of and that you see the extremes on the left and right, the kind of professional aggrieved, that's going too far, and it's not constructive.
Thanks, Lou. I feel heard. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'll talk to Tyler. Is that okay with you, Tyler? Okay. So let's see. So I want to go back to information sources. Is that what I want to go back to? What do I want to talk about? Actually, so I want to make a point on this line on feminism, and the idea actually of this kind of fits in the identity politics area, which is, groups that have been marginalized in the past or discriminated against, and what's happening now is a lot of those groups are getting some more traction and being heard, and their voices are being lifted up, and greater awareness is happening around the things that have happened to people in those groups, the ways in which they have been marginalized or harmed, and I think that's a good thing. I have also sometimes felt, though, like the professional aggrieved, like that in some ways it's not actually helpful to help people think of themselves as victims and to, oh, poor me. And so because I think both are true. This is one of the interesting things about life and conundrums about life. So it is true that those people have been hurt and that they've been discriminated against. And the world, we should work towards more acceptance and more justice and more fairness for those people. That's all true. And it's also not helpful to encourage everyone in that group to think of themselves as being attacked all the time, and so they're interpreting everything that happens to them as an affront or as some kind of discrimination.
I try.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, I hear you saying that it does seem like there's a group of professionally egreged people, as well as, and you acknowledging the history and the damage and the destruction and the good of lifting up those voices and getting them heard and being aware of that pain and that struggle. I heard you acknowledge the good in that, and then also acknowledge the harm that actually comes to someone when they permanently believe themselves to be a victim of the world. And when they take on that victim mentality, you see the damage that does, not, at least to the person who's taking it on, that it harms the person.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for hearing me. And I want to share this experience because I just had it just recently. Listening to people, so I was listening to the stories of several people from marginalized groups about their history of being discriminated against, and members of their family being discriminated against, actual discrimination happening, and the history of that for them. And what I became more aware of is that when that's happened to you, and that there's been a long history of that happening to people in your group, it's very difficult not to have in your mind, is this happening to me now because of discrimination? Even though it may not actually be discrimination in the moment, you still carry the burden, as of being a person of that group, you still carry the burden of wondering, is this because this person just doesn't like me, or they're discriminating against me? And that was a burden that I wasn't really conscious of before, I wasn't thinking about before, and I think that is a real burden that they carry, and something that I have more empathy. So when someone says, oh, I think maybe this is discrimination, and like, I don't think it is, I'm looking at the situation, I don't think it is, I have more empathy for them now, because I realize that it is easy for them to think, it's hard for them not to wonder, is it because of who I am?
So I hear you saying that you had a recent listening experience where you were listening to people of a marginalized identity group, and what you took away from that experience was, sorry, this dog's not leaving me alone. What you took away from that experience was understanding that even if the discrimination isn't happening, the burden of worrying about it happening is a legitimate emotional burden that they're carrying. And you want to be empathetic to that and understanding of that. And yeah, I think that kind of went back to the filters thing, that's kind of their burden. They have to have that filter now.
Yeah, and I don't say they have to. I mean, it's possible that someone could heal from past experience, or it is possible, I think, to lift that burden. I mean, I'm Jewish, and I don't go around thinking all the time things that happen to me because there's anti-Semitism in the world, and there is anti-Semitism in the world.
Yeah.
But if I had experienced more of it in my life, I might carry that burden around with me. And so in the past, I didn't have a lot of empathy for people that were saying that. And now I have more compassion for them, because I realize that is something that they are suffering from, and not by any fault of theirs. Anyway, sorry, I went over my time.
Yeah, no, I hear you saying that you're Jewish and you could be actively suffering over anti-Semitism and be in that spot, and you're not. And so it is possible to lift that burden. But when you see people that are still actively living in that burden, you're empathetic to that.
Yes, thank you. I feel heard.
Cool. I think we're up to Art. Ooh. Let's see. I I want to address some of the issues with feminism and gender equality that from my angle. Just the real quick, easy ones. Women under 30 out earn their male counterparts. So we've already won there. That's like we're already winning. That doesn't really get talked about because then women are powerful and strong. This goes back to like when I brought up the matriarchy thing, I was pointing out women's strengths and women's advantages in society. And that was the threatening thing that then somebody turned on me for. And yeah, that's why Jordan Peterson, I think, gets turned on a lot, because he's a social psychologist, clinical psychologist. He talks about the numbers and the statistics. And there are things happening right now that are unfair. Like, for example, in the STEM fields, women with their research being less quoted, basically underqualified women are being forced in. They're being hired in. They're being pushed in because they want to have more women in the STEM fields. And if you look at the numbers, they're not as qualified as the male counterparts. And just there's something wrong about it. There's something that's like, I get why we're doing it, but it's not a good thing. I don't know. I'll stop there.
Okay. I'm hearing first that your intention to talk about feminism, and that that you're concerned that somebody like Jordan Peterson, for instance, as a clinical psychologist, focuses on numbers that are actual numbers, and that you feel that people don't want to listen to that.
Yeah, when it harms the narrative, when it harms that feminist narrative, or men are oppressors and like women are powerless, and so we need to give women more power because they're so powerless. And then like where you're giving them power and how you're doing it, sometimes you're like, well, that's not a good thing to do, but you can't have that discussion right now.
Yeah. I'm hearing it likened almost to an affirmative action sort of thing, where people who are less qualified are being put into positions just in the spirit of equality, and even though it might not be, even though they might not be as qualified as their male counterparts, and you see that as damaging more than helpful.
Yeah, long-term damaging. I get the short-term benefits and the goals and the history. I understand what's going on. I just, I've listened to a lot of Jordan Peterson. I was gonna show you guys. I'm quite the Jordan Peterson fanboy. Mm-hmm. I really like Jordan Peterson, and yeah, I don't know. I've experienced my fair share of sexual violence. Well, not sexual violence, but aggressive sexual women. And like, it's something I have to deal with. Like, I drive Lyft here in San Francisco. I've only ever been sexually assaulted by a lesbian. Like, I've been forced into sex by a woman before. Like, women aren't angels. They're not perfect human beings. They're humans. We're humans too. Men are fucked up. Women are fucked up. Everybody's fucked up. And so to turn these sexual issues like the Me Too stuff into a men-only issue, it's that this is something only men can do. All right, I want to tell this story. It was after a wedding, and this young girl followed me home, followed me into my house, followed me into my bedroom, shut the door behind me, wouldn't allow me to leave, was blocking the door, trying to force my clothes off, force her clothes off. I'm saying no, and she's demanding sex out of me. And eventually, I realized that I could either fight this person or have sex with her. Well, sex seems like an awfully easier solution. So I went ahead and had sex with her. Well, I was in town for a wedding, so I was staying with family. My mother was at the wedding and heard about this and rushed home and caught her 23-year-old war veteran son with an 18-year-old high school senior. So she assumed I had raped her. So like, yeah, that's how you get somebody who's able to go on Kavanaugh's side and not feel a freaking thing about it. Yeah, I got no problem taking Kavanaugh's back, because I got framed up like that, and I got shamed and treated poorly, and I couldn't communicate myself, and I was a victim in some sense in that situation. I have a lot of pain around that, but you can't talk about women being violent and women being powerful in the current climate. It goes against the feminist narrative, and so it doesn't fit into that box, and you just get shut down. I'll stop.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. I feel you saying that, well, you told a story about being in town for a wedding, and a young woman, younger than probably should have been involved with, followed you home, basically forced herself onto you, or at least you acquiesced because you felt that it was an easier route than fighting, was to have sex.
Yeah, like literally it was a physical confrontation. She was
Right.
blocking the door and like not taking no for an answer, and it was like escalating. So it was
right. So I get the sense like it was either hurt her physically or acquiesce to the sexuality.
Yeah, it may not have hurt her. I might have been able to just shove her in the corner and gotten out, but like I was still trying to like change my clothes and stuff. Like,
Right.
I don't know. It's just a fucked situation, man.
Yeah. But I think the heavy thing that I heard in the end is that your mother rushed in and seeing you as a grown man with a younger woman who is barely of age, the automatic assumption was that you were assaulting her. And
Yes.
in fact, it was the other way around. And you feel that that's an illustration and a microcosm for the entire Me Too movement, that there's, there's a lot of a potential framing that can go on. And for that reason, you kind of stand with Judge Kavanaugh, in everything that just happened.
Well,
with that.
I'm willing to believe him. I'm willing to say that this is 30-something years old, and there's nuance. And what are we really doing here? What are we really talking about? What's really important? Like, what's really happening? And like, yeah, I don't know. I feel like when that feminist narrative takes over, it feels like we do live in a gynocentric society that does place women ahead of men in a lot of situations, and that in that particular situation, her word counts for more than yours. Her feelings count for more than yours. Her interpretation counts for more than yours. So she counts for more than you as a human being. That feels to me like a matriarchal, gynocentric, female-centered society.
So I hear you saying that that you're using the word matriarchy and gynocentric society. That you feel that that's what we're living in because of things like the Me Too movement, where it's just automatically believed that the woman is being truthful and is always the victim. However, you're expressing that there's a lot of nuance to it, and you're not so sure. And you're willing to challenge that gynocentric attitude because you do believe that, based on your experience, that there is much more to the picture than usually meets the eye. Is that pretty much?
Well, that men are being hurt.
It's time.
Yeah, it's time. But that's basically it. I'm willing to challenge it because men are being hurt, and it's not helping society. We need men to be healthy too. We need to address
right,
that. Yeah.
Right. So you're actually using you're actually talking about the fact that there's an imbalance, and that the balance is what's key.
Yeah. Thank you. I feel fully heard.
Thank you.
I just want to check with everyone. So when the timer goes off, are people hearing it or no? You are.
Sometimes.
Okay. I'll let it go for a little longer to make sure that people hear it. Okay.
Okay. So, Lou, would you reflect back for me, please?
Yes.
Okay. So, we're in the dark woods of the feminist conversation. I'm going to keep going.
Okay.
At the end of my segment earlier, I started talking about Jordan Peterson, and I recently watched an interview with him where he was using statistics to illustrate exactly the point, or one of the points that Tyler was making just now, is that and he was using statistics about imprisonment rates, which I found really an interesting concept, that an interesting way a metric to use in that situation, because he was saying that because men are incarcerated over women by a whatever margin he was saying, 5-1, 10-1, whatever it was, that how can that be that we're living in a patriarchal society when we punish men so much more than we punish women? I'll stop there.
So you're acknowledging that we are getting into the thick of the feminist conversation, and you're happy to continue that, and that you recently were listening to an interview with Jordan Peterson, which I guess is a guy on the right that Tyler mentioned, and that he, in this interview that you were listening to, he was using statistics to show how men are incarcerated at higher rates than women, and since we're punishing men more than women, how could we say that that we're not being fair to women? That the women women are treated more poorly than men.
Right. And Tyler also used a metric earlier about women under 30 who are apparently paid more, better paid than men at that same age. And that, I'll accept that as truth. I don't know one way or the other. But to me, these are very narrow metrics that we're using. And when I look at feminism, I look at, the upper end of the executive world, right? That I mean, the statistics that I have heard are that, and again, not knowing what's true in this point or not, but the figures that I've heard is that the people who are making like high six figures are generally very dominant. It's a very dominant male a segment of society there. And I also look at the amount of single mothers that are out there, and the way in which our society does not necessarily address their pain and their predicament in terms of social safety nets. And to me, those are the kind of metrics that I look at when I look at feminism and inequality.
So I think what you're saying is that that one of the things, so you're reflecting on the limits of using statistics, individual statistics, to try to argue that what is the condition of women overall in society. And so even though the statistic that was quoted that 30% that women under 30 are making more than men, and that's an indication that women have plenty of power, women are doing fine. That's only one thing, and just looking at that one thing may be ignoring the fact that at the high end, where presumably there's more power and more influence in society, women are not earning as much as men. And so you're saying it depends on which statistics you look at or which parts of society you look at to try to determine what's happening. What is the condition of women relative to men? And you gave in as an example, single mothers, that there are many, many of them, and you don't see the society really moving to try to support them or address their needs. And that's an indication to you that society is not treating women as well as they might treat men.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think it's worth mentioning that that when we're talking about these statistics, and I think this goes back to what we were discussing earlier, how I have this belief that like I am pretty convinced that we do live in a patriarchy, and therefore, and I admit that therefore, the information comes in, and I challenge the information that doesn't fit that ideology, and I accept the information that does fit that ideology, and I think that's a big problem. And I'm willing to admit to that, and I think that's something that we should all be striving to kind of figure out. And again, bringing that back to empathy, I think that's a big place where we can start.
So you think we do live in a patriarchy, and you think because of that, because you're a man and we do live in a patriarchy, you do have you and maybe the society as a whole has a tendency to evaluate things through that lens, and not necessarily see things accurately the way they are. And I'm forgetting the last point that you made.
Just that empathy is the way that we can get around that, I think. Anyway.
Right, and that it's more important for us to try to understand each other and have compassion for each other and figure out what to do together than to try to say who's right, and like use all these different ways of trying to prove who's right and who's wrong.
Exactly.
Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I feel very hurt. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, I'll speak to Bill.
Okay.
So what's up most strongly for me right now is the whole thing about information flow and accuracy of information, and how people use information to try to prove, what they want to prove, and how they leave out things that muddy the waters or that might indicate something else. Earlier, Art gave the example of that the Republicans had complete control of the government and they didn't pass the border wall, and the truth is they don't have complete control of government. They had majorities in the House and the Senate, but we have a lot of mechanisms in our government for the minority being able to block things. So even if the House had passed funding for the border wall, in the Senate, the Democrats could have filibustered it, and you wouldn't have gotten 60 votes, and they couldn't have passed it. So people in the press and people on the left they say that all the time, that, the Republicans had complete control of the Congress. They could have done whatever they wanted. Well, that's not really true unless you have a supermajority, and they didn't have that. And that's a detail that people that don't understand government maybe wouldn't say, but it's, it's a nice way of saying they could have done it, but they didn't. Now, and certainly people, so everyone does that. I'm not only blaming people on the left for doing that. All people that are trying to make arguments do that. They leave out parts, and people who are totally fair-minded would try to leave those parts in, and would So I'll stop there.
Okay. So one of the points and the examples you made was how you talked about information streaming and how we use our filters. And the example you gave was about the Democrats saying that the Republicans could have passed a border wall when they had control of both the House, the Senate, and the presidency. But they did not have a 60 supermajority in the Senate, which would have been 60 votes, which then, so the Democrats did have some control to stop that plan, which is not acknowledged in these narratives.
Yeah, and part of the reason that our government, the founders, built those mechanisms into our governing structure, so that you can't have the tyranny of the majority. A simple majority can't just say, this is what we're doing. That the minority has some sway is so that people have to talk to each other and they have to compromise and collaborate. Our government is set up so you have to do that. Otherwise, nothing works. And I think the reason things are not working right now is because people have very much a power over thinking in terms of how to accomplish stuff. Well, we just have to get enough power so that we can force the other side to do what we want. And, and that power over thinking, that the way to solve problems is to amass enough power that you can just force the other people to do what you want. That's the thinking that, even if you do that, you amass enough power, then the other side is just waiting so that they could get enough power so they could do the same thing to you. And so I think we need much more a spirit of, and this is kind of fits in the culture of empathy spirit, of wanting to understand one another, wanting to talk to one another, giving respect and dignity to people that hold a different, well-considered position, and to try to find compromise. That's what I think makes sense.
Okay. So you were talking about that really if we're going back to original intent of the framers of the Constitution, that they set it up to encourage collaboration and also to avoid the tyranny of the majority. And so therefore, our government is not based on this or that, but essentially the ability to compromise, respect each other's opinion, and come up with an equitable solution. And that was what you see the intent is. And that's what's being lost right now, why government doesn't work, because of the inability to compromise and come together in that way.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Let's see. The other thing I wanted to say, well, my time's up. So I'll say I wanted to bring up more like economic justice, because I do think a lot of these things like feminism, like identity politics. Really, the problem is there's too much economic injustice. There's too much economic inequality. And so people are suffering, and if people weren't suffering so much, we wouldn't be at each other all the time trying to, yeah. So I think a lot of this is around trying to solve economic injustice, both racial, feminist, all the different identity groups, they're trying to gain economic power. I mean, I think that's a lot of it.
Yeah, so you're feeling that a lot of this dysfunction and acrimony basically stems from an economic inequality in our country. And so therefore that is being distorted. And if we could address economic inequality, then that would go a long way to making a more equitable and civil society.
Yes, thank you for hearing me.
Okay, sure. Okay. All right. I'll talk to Tyler. Are we going to get zipped back into when do we get zipped back in?
I was just looking. It's 11:38. So I think we go to 11:45. Didn't Edwin want 15 minutes at the end?
I think that's it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. So Tyler?
Listening.
All right. So very, very interesting. First of all, being a special ed teacher, and I was more the extreme end of the, so I want to personally, I didn't have Tyler's experience, but I know people and I know situations, and I want to validate it. My own experience is that I had young women who would come in and immediately accuse me of sexual abuse if I asked them to do their math. I'll stop there.
Yeah. I hear you saying that while you didn't share my experience, you wanted to validate it because you had experiences where, women were accusing you of sexual abuse because they didn't want to do their math.
Yeah, I paraphrase, but there's literally, I had students, walk in the class and immediately threaten me with that. And we had men and women, and we had double blind, and not double blind, but essentially there was no place.
There's always somebody else looking over you, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And so we had a way to deal with that, and that helped allay my fear and allowed me to deal with things in a even-handed way.
So I hear you saying that you had systems in place that allowed for there being more than one person in the room all the time, and whatever you needed to feel safe to know that you were not going to be falsely accused.
Mm-hmm. And and I also saw the struggle that these young women, not necessarily, sometimes the same young woman, sometimes they were entitled, and sometimes they were, they were completely, it wasn't their fault, and they'd gone through horrendous things. Feminism is really not addressed. I agree with Art that the demographics about prison things are narrow. Just to consider that heart attack victims, the whole treatment was based on men for years until just a few years ago. And so there's an incredible blind spot there that I think that has to be tenderly opened but acknowledged in the clear light of dawn, to basically, and I don't think women, I didn't see women need preference. They have all the talent they need, and just to be supported emotionally, and then the rest it'll take itself, and given equitable pay and things like that. But just basically a level playing field, women are going to do just fine.
I think I missed a chunk of that, but I'll try.
Yeah.
I hear you saying that that you had some interactions with women that were entitled and women that had been through a lot and that were struggling, and that you have a lot of experience with that, and that you don't think that they needed preferential treatment so much as they need an even playing field and a fair shot, and they have plenty of talent and plenty of skills and they can do it fine, but they do need to be properly emotionally supported. And things like the fact that a heart attack treatment was for everyone was actually based off of the male anatomy, and that, you know, we are not, like, literally in that case, the empathy wasn't being given to the women in a medical context. And so, like, that you feel is indicative of the wider blind spots that society has towards women's differences. And we need to be more sensitive to that.
Yeah. No, that was great. And then also, I just want to say, and to your point, and then the men need that too. I mean, the men need to be emotionally supported. A lot of times, you know, and saying you're the man, and then again, all these assumptions are being made about you, but you're really hurting inside, and you really feel vulnerable, and you don't know what to do. And you know, and you certainly can feel misunderstood and isolated. So, and that's what, again, what these sorts of conversations, I think, allow us to do, is to share our struggles, and that's, and I'll stop there.
I hear you saying that the men similarly also need emotional support, that, you know, a lot is put on men and they aren't really allowed to share their pain and their fears, and men internalize a lot of that. And society also needs to update how we're treating and acting towards men.
Thanks, Tal. I feel completely heard. Thank you.
Thank you, William. Do we have time?
Well, yes, we're at 11:44, but let's do one more. Go ahead.
I'll just go ahead and go to you, Lou, since we're already talking.
Okay.
Where to start? I guess I want to echo William's point about that, you know, hey, all this stuff for women, yes, good, definitely, totally agree, but also all the same stuff for men and boys. That men and, like, okay, the way that I see the life game, men and women have a different game that we have to play in life, and we just do. And the way that I see the men's side of the game is that I have to go out and be productive and produce and build something and make something. And if I don't do that, I'm fucking done. It's prison. It's death. It's suicide. Society discards you. Society does not care about you. It is a miserable, depressing, ugly place. Those are where the mass shooters come from. Those are where the perverts come from. Those are where the dark men come from, if I don't build and make something. And I think a lot of what Jordan's, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
So I was just going to reflect that back. So what I hear you saying is you're totally behind supporting women and supporting opportunity for them and supporting understanding for them and helping them be successful. And you want the same thing for men and boys, and that it's needed for them. And that maybe that's not being recognized, that it's needed as much for men as it is for women, maybe in a different way. And in your experience, men and women there are two different games. You know, that in the same way that women have constraints and things, societal pressures and things that are on them for being women, men also have a game that they are asked to play with certain rules and requirements and societal pressures, and they suffer from the rules of that game also.
Right. Yes. And yeah, I don't think you guys fully know my background. Just to fill you guys in, I know I'm doing this to you right at the very end here, but my mother raised me gay. She dressed me up like a girl and told people I was gay when I was a young child, and I spent a lot of my teen and 20s recovering my masculinity. I joined the Marine Corps. I jump out of airplanes. I do all kinds of macho bullshit. And I feel that was my effort to reclaim my masculinity. My mother hasn't spoken to me in like 4 years. She just cut me out of her life because it was easier than addressing anything that she had done to me that had hurt me. She wouldn't address the hurt. And so, yeah, that's where my big positive masculinity and exploring that and trying to find that's where that comes from for me, is from a place of pain, from a place of being really deeply hurt. And, you know, when I listen to somebody like Jordan and he's talking about, you know, the spectrum of where you can end up as a man, and the fact that there is this void that you can go off into denialism and evil and ugliness, and like you want to avoid that. And I don't know, I find him to be a very positive guiding force, and I'm very interested in positive masculinity and having conversations about healthy men and positive healthy men. And one last thing on that point is where I see feminism getting rid of these all male spaces and denying that growth. It's just very concerning to me. I think we need those all male spaces. It isn't about cutting out women. It's about getting men together to let us grow the way we need to.
Okay, they're asking us to replay. So let me just say that, thanks for sharing that. And so your life experience really taught you, didn't teach you about being a man, and kind of suppressed your masculinity. And you feel like you've been in the process of reclaiming that. And people like Jordan Peterson have really helped you in that way, and that you feel a need for that men need to be together with men to learn those things, and that men having their own spaces to do that, men's work is needed and valid and should be supported.
Oh, yes. I feel heard.
Great.
Should we go back?
Yes, let's return.
Okay, Lou, if you're recording, you can stop the recording because this one will capture it.
Oh, okay.